Hey there, and welcome back to Checkbox Other, the podcast that celebrates those that don't fit in a defined box or category. I am your host, Nikki Innocent, and oh my goodness, I am glad to be back. We took a quick break for the early part of July. There's a lot of celebration for the 4th of July. There's a lot of conversation about what the 4th of July means overall to all the members of the American fabric. And so I hope you had a time to celebrate what's wonderful about America, but also take a minute to understand what really freedom and independence means. I am going to get right to it today. Our guest is Janine Kwoh. Oh my goodness, this conversation was incredible. So Janine is the founder of Kwohtations, a greeting card company that also does incredible artwork and designs, and she will do a much better job of introducing Kwohtations. But I met Janine at a maker's market, a market here in Somerville, Massachusetts called the ESOM Market. A friend of mine started it, and it features makers in the local area that are making incredible things. And I walked by her table and saw the incredible greeting cards and artwork, and they made me laugh, they made me cry, and I couldn't turn away. So I started buying her greeting cards. I started talking to her, and if you've met me at all, you know that once I start talking to you and something that you're doing is great, I can't wait to tell everyone about it. Janine and I talk about so many things. We have a common background in investments, in private equity, in the financial services space in general, and we talked about the transition from kind of that corporate life into entrepreneurship. Janine's work started as a side hustle that was one that came from a place of self-healing, and so I am just so intrigued for you to hear more about that. And for those of you that are trying to figure out what you want to do, where you can find a passion to pursue or a purpose to pursue, this is definitely the episode for you. Whether that be your full-time gig, whether that be a passion side project, a side hustle, something that makes money, something that doesn't, I think we did a really great job talking about how something like Kwohtations can come into being. From an idea, a personal need, to the market telling you they need more of the amazing magic that you're putting into place. We also talk about embracing your creative side, giving language to the unspoken, dealing with grief. We talked about taking the time and energy to be inclusive and to create space for everything that you're doing, whether that is something big or small, just the time, the mental energy, the mental space, and the consideration, the empathy that goes into creating a much more inclusive world. We talk about releasing what no longer serves you. We discuss allyship and what allyship is all about. The fact that a lot of times allies call themselves allies when maybe it makes more sense for others to call you an ally before you call yourself that. We talk about getting out of your routine and to connect with others. And we talk about, oh my goodness, my favorite part, the power of proximity. So if any of that sounded interesting, stick around. We talked and talked and talked, and I wish we could have talked more. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you have any feedback, any bits of love, feel free to head on over to nikkiinnocent.com/podcast, and there's a link on there that says join the conversation. If you have any comments that you have from the episode, drop them there. If you have any topics that you definitely want to hear, drop them in there. I want to hear from you. Also, if you don't already, please do subscribe to this podcast by pressing subscribe in whatever platform you use to listen. And if you have a moment, definitely drop in a rating and a review. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you like, what you don't, what we can dial up, dial back. But really, the ratings and the reviews help other people figure out if this is a podcast for them. So with all that being said, I am so grateful for you to be so generous with your ears today, and I can't wait for you to hear the interview. I'll catch you on the flip side. Hi, Janine.
Hi, Nikki. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. I'm so good. I'm so excited that you are here today.
I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yes. Well, the first thing I always ask, and I can't even give myself a minute to wait for this, is I want to hear about your journey. I want to hear about who you are today and what about your life has led you to where you are.
Oh, that's a big question.
I know.
Well, let's see. I'll start at the beginning. I was born in San Francisco, but my family moved to Shanghai, China, when I was in 3rd grade. So I actually grew up in the expat community there until I came back to the U.S. for college. So I guess, I consider myself both Chinese and American, kind of both fully and maybe neither fully. And I went to Brown University in Providence and graduated with a business economics degree, primarily because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it seemed practical. And then right after college, I ended up working at an investment consulting firm in Boston doing private equity research. And I know you also worked in private equity for a bit. So I think there are some interesting parallels in our journeys. So I was at that job for a few years, and it was one of those experiences that was honestly very challenging for me at the time in terms of the workload, and the culture. But I'm really grateful for in hindsight. And then, at the same time, while I was working my full-time finance job, I very randomly started making greeting cards. And it came out of a conversation with a friend. And we were like, wouldn't it be funny if somebody made cards for all these things that happen in life that we don't talk about?
Yes.
So I started just like making these cards at night when I got home, and I was block printing these characters on them that have become a signature for Kwohtations, which is my business. And, I think they said things like, "Sorry you hate your haircut" was one of them. And that was for my friend Amy. And "You give me feelings," which is actually still part of my card line. So it's just like this funny thing that kind of blew up and has been a consistent part of my life. And, that kind of kicked off this dual life of being a full-time employee at these like really corporate, intellectually challenging jobs, and then coming home to make cards that I was giving to friends and then selling online. And then, let's see, a few years in, I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to move into something that was a bit more meaningful to me personally. So I started working at a nonprofit, a venture philanthropy organization that provides funding and strategic supports to other nonprofits. And there I got to wear a lot of different hats, data analysis and grant writing and management and project management. And then like all this time I was making cards, doing craft markets on the weekends, starting to sell into stores, selling online. And I had started to shift my mindset into thinking about it from a hobby to kind of like a side hustle, and then thinking like, oh, maybe this could be like a full-time endeavor.
Yeah.
So that led me to leaving my job last year, so last June, almost a year ago, to pursue making art full-time. I still am not sure what I'm doing, but it feels good.
Yeah.
So it's a long way of saying, so that's a lot of like the windy road of how I got to where I'm now, which is being the owner and artist behind Kwohtations. It's a line of letterpress printed greeting cards and also art prints and gifts that celebrate a diversity of identities and life experiences.
Oh, I love that. There's a couple things that stood out so beautifully in the way that you described your journey. I think this idea of this dual life and kind of holding a space that was kind of bridging different worlds, I thought was so beautifully, beautifully apropos in both when you were talking about growing up, both being fully Chinese and fully American, and then at the same time, neither of either of those. And then in the same space of trying to figure out, am I in this very standard corporate, you mentioned intellectual space, or am I in this creative expression space? And I'm kind of bridging both of those places. And then even going from like hobby to side hustle to full time, just understanding how to live within the spectrum of all of those things. It's just a really great way to see your journey. It's something that seems to be a theme that repeats itself, and then at the same time is such a core part of the beautiful way. And we'll dive into more about the messages that you put out with Kwohtations, but the beautiful way you are so inclusive in the content that you put out into the world.
Yeah, and I think, I think it all seems more strategic in hindsight. That there's like an arc to it. I think at the time, I was just taking a step forward, and each step led me to see what I liked and didn't like, and that led me to the next thing. But I do think that living in between, or like straddling multiple jobs and worlds, I think it does help you be able to step into other people's shoes a bit more easily. At least I like to think that's the case. And with my cards, I draw a lot from my own experiences, but I also try to think, if I'm the person receiving this card, like what is it that I would want to hear?
Yeah. Yeah. And giving the space. I think one of the beautiful things that you do, and God, I feel like I'm going to hop right into the cards, but there is this balance of humor that you allow for the space in between of not necessarily knowing exactly how someone's going to feel, but leaving this open-ended nature to like, I don't know how you're going to feel, but no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, I see you and it's okay. Especially in the traditional greeting card world, I don't know that you get that kind of coverage, right? That allows people, one, to be themselves, but two, to be seen and heard in that same space.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is like exactly the sort of spot that I'm hoping to fill. I guess what really interests me is sort of like digging that one layer deeper under what everybody is projecting of themselves out in the world. And like kind of the way I think about it is like in terms of, you know, what are you posting on your Instagram feed versus what's in your Google search history?
Can you imagine?
I know. You know, for the most part, I'm like not so interested in making cards that celebrate like your Instagram life. I'm interested in making cards that are, you know, addressing the questions and fears that you're like Googling by yourself in bed at night. And my thought is that like if we like, let's talk about those and shed some light on them and add some humor to them. And then maybe they might seem less scary and also like more normal for all of us.
Oh, I love that so much. I feel like that. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to use that. I'm a very big metaphor person to kind of shortcut a lot of really difficult things that we don't always have language for. And I love that. It's like, what is the filtered version of your life that you're happy to kind of, you know, blast from every social media curated rooftop? And then what are the things that you're really curious about and potentially vulnerable and have a soft spot that you're not sure or don't have the answer about? Like, again, you and I coming from the PE space, and I believe, were you at New Profit?
Yeah, I was at New Profit.
Yeah. Okay. So I worked with them too when I was over at Bain. Being in this space of like really trying to find the right answer and be certain and have the data drive a lot of your decisions, right? And the returns and ensuring the investment is a solid one. Like there's a lot of certainty in a lot of that space. And then leaving the room, when you're in the Google sphere, you're curious. You don't know the answer. You're trying to find the right words to use to get to the answer you might be looking for, or to do a little of that exploration. And just those two juxtapositions are such a beautiful and interesting way to think about it, because a lot of times when you see greeting cards in this space, a lot of them will be that filtered, polished, I hope everything's wonderful. And the response is, yes, everything's wonderful. And at the end of the day, not every day is everything wonderful. And even if it is, it took a lot of not so wonderful to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's like in some of those parts of life that are, you know, a little bit harder or really hard, it's kind of the time when we need connection the most. And I see greeting cards as kind of like being a conduit, like a very tangible way or excuse to reach out to somebody else.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Before we hop, because I can talk about, I have so many things to talk about with greeting cards, because they have been, yours specifically have been such a wonderful resource for me in tough times. So I will dive into that. But I want to, before we hop there, to talk a little bit about, I'd love to hear you share a story, or maybe more than one story, of a time where you have felt other or different. Just, you know, going along the theme of this podcast.
Yeah. Well, I guess in general, I mean, we kind of touched on this, but again, sort of because I'm ethnically Chinese and grew up for like a lot of my formative years in China, but also and very American, and was born here and have lived here for the past 15 years. I have always felt a little bit othered by both sides. You know, when I'm in China, I feel very American. You know, it's obvious from how I dress and speak and like carry myself that I'm not born and raised in China. And so to people there, you know, including parts of my family, I'm basically American. So I think for me, that's one type of othering, like feeling like I'm not Chinese enough. And then sort of from the other side, when I'm here, I feel like the first thing people notice about me or anyone is my gender and my race and my ethnicity, or, you know, whatever they assume those to be. And right. I remember when I first came to the States for college, just being shocked by the amount of attention I got for being Asian. Even though like we're everywhere. And like, But by that, I mean, the number of times people would stop and ask me like, you know, like, what are you, or where are you from, or like, konnichiwa, or, you know, like something or more sexualized that like references my race, my gender at the same time. And I was really taken aback. And actually that still like happens to me more regularly than you would think, like even in Boston and New York. And so that is kind of like a consistent, I don't know, sort of like prick that I get once in a while. Yeah. I guess just to explain it like a little bit more, like why it bothers me. When someone says like, where are you really from? Or even like, go back to China, which happens, it makes me feel like I don't belong here, that I'm not welcome or I'm not American. And the fact that people come up and just like demand answers from you without saying hi is pretty dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And like you're kind of there as a curiosity and not really like worth them expending any social graces. You know, and then when it's primarily men and it's like a racialized catcall, like being catcalled is generally uncomfortable and
Right.
sometimes frightening for women. But when you know that someone has some preconceived notion about you based on how you look, whether it's like the idea that Asian women are overly sexualized or that we're submissive or both, I think it is scary because you know that they're not fully seeing you as a person.
Right.
And they have assumptions of what you're like and what you want.
And on top of that, not only what you like and what you want, but what they have, and I'll use they, I know it's a very general, but the people that are infringing upon your human place, right? The fact that you're feeling dehumanized, that not only making assumption of who you are and what you want, but what they have the power to do.
Right.
That you are there for something to be done to or questioned about whether you have the consent to participate in that or not. Though it's one of the most kind of lonely experiences to be on the receiving end of something like that, and all you want to do is scream in their face, like, don't do that. Stop fucking doing that to me. At the same time, unfortunately, I think as we learned in the last couple of years, that feeling, whatever the words are, that feeling of kind of infringing on my humanity is something that has happened to a lot of people. And you mentioned the little pricks that you get of it. I like to think of them as like little paper cuts. And if you have those that come up in so many different interactions you have, that small paper cut, if you have a bunch of them, it becomes a wound. And it's one of those things that you're walking around with and trying to protect at the same time. So it's not always what you want. It's not always what you're doing out in the world. It's what you're operating to avoid at the same time. And unfortunately, it's not your work, right? Like you can't stop that person from doing that. But for some reason, our society, especially being so openly curious, like I think curious is a generous term for what that is, but there's a lot more leeway given to the people that are infringing on your humanity by asking that question than there is in your ability to say, don't do that to me, and feel safe in saying, don't do that to me. That hurts me. That's not okay here. For some reason, that is more of a societal infringement than the actual question in the first place, or the cat call in the first place.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Honestly, thank you so much for being willing to share that, because knowing that there are a lot of people and a lot of women that listen to this podcast, I think a lot of times we know exactly what you're trying to say there, but we don't know how to say it ourselves sometimes, or we don't know why it feels the way it feels all the time. And sometimes we've been told that it's something we're doing. It's like, what were you wearing? Oh, well, you know what? No matter what I'm wearing, it's happening. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because a lot of these microaggressions happen sort of on the everyday level, and like, you know, if it happened once, maybe it would seem, I don't know, like not the worst thing, but because they happen consistently, it's like their cumulative effect, I think, that is actually very damaging. And I think studies have shown that they do have like very long-term sort of health, emotional tolls. But in some ways, because they're scattered and because like the people who are sort of like taking these actions are different people and they're happening sort of at different times in your life, they seem like they're isolated events, but actually, you know, taken together, it's something that's not so innocuous.
Right, exactly. And I'm finding myself being curious about, like, you know, moving out of this world of following what is socially acceptable, right? Going into this 9-to-5 job and finding, you know, a lot of the way that this is said is kind of like the doctor lawyer path. So like the financially secure path, right? The thing that people can kind of understand what you do, feel comfortable with it, and moving from there into a more expressive, creative, really, I feel like vulnerable space. Have you found, as you as a person living life day to day, outside of your job, that you're more aware of, open to the idea of things being different than the way we're told that they are?
I think so. I think so because I think one, I'm just out in the world more. Yeah. I think when you're spending 8, 9, 10, 11 hours in an office with the same people, you're just not exposed to as much experiences or as many different people, and you're having sort of the same conversations over and over again, or at least that's kind of how I felt. So now when you're just like out in the world, going to a coffee shop, like talking to somebody on the street, you just like end up having interactions with people that make you think. So I think that's one, just like being out and like not really secluded in an office building. And then two, I think because I'm constantly thinking about what to make next,
Yeah.
constantly looking for card ideas, I do think that I tend to like listen a bit more maybe than I used to for like, what do I think that people are struggling with? Like, what do I think people are thinking about, or like, what are people celebrating? And just like trying to see if I can glean some themes between like what I'm talking about with my friends or like what I overhear on the subway. So in that sense, I think yes.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I am so grateful to your work for in my own personal life, I've had grief and, and loss in the past when I was younger. And I guess I had the fortune of not considering myself an adult who was supposed to know how to handle it. But recently, I lost a very close friend of mine relatively unexpectedly. And there've been a couple of other like pretty formative relationships or people that are very close to me who've lost people that are very close to them, and trying to find the right words to say in that experience has been very difficult because, you don't want to be like, well, at least I want to be able to give them a hug, right? And how do you give them a hug if you're not there? And a lot of times, like, I'm so sorry doesn't feel like it's sufficient. And so your cards have just they've been a true blessing for me. I feel like the way that you've been able to express sympathy, empathy, and really just connection through specifically kind of these ideas of loss and uncertainty of when you've lost someone that's so impactful in your life, what you're supposed to do next. The one card that you had that was kind of like it reminds me of a quiz in a magazine, like a Cosmo quiz, where it's like, here, you start at this question. If you answer yes to this, go down into this bubble, and here's the next question to ask.
Yeah.
It was one of my friends, there was a lot of loss in her life and her husband's life right around the time that they had just gotten married. So there was a lot of celebration and a lot of loss at the same time. And so all these mixed emotions happening while you're grieving and celebrating and being unsure where to go. It could not have been a more perfect card for that. So I'd love to just hear from you and your perspective on like how that content has come to be, and how even more so, like, I'm trying not to gush too hard, but like hearing from the people that have utilized your message and your art to help kind of bridge that gap of the language they're not sure how to use yet.
Yeah. Well, thank you for for saying that. I feel like sometimes, I always say I make things because I need them, which is true. And then I kind of put them out in the world thinking that, maybe it could help someone else too. But sometimes it feels like I'm just sending them out into a void and I'm not really sure where or how they're landing. So I guess to back up a bit, my partner at the time a few years ago passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. And we were both 28 at the time, so very young. Yeah. And he was the first person that I was really close to and that I loved who had died. And I just didn't have any coping mechanisms in place. Like I just didn't know how this was going to go, and I didn't know how I was going to get through it. And, I have just such wonderful friends, and they just showed up for me in full force. But even then, like with a really strong support network, I felt really disconnected from everybody.
Right.
Because in your 20s, like not many people that I know have had these significant losses yet, and especially not of a partner. So I felt just like very isolated. And I think on top of that, like I think we as society in general just aren't good at creating space for and talking about grief and loss. Like even having been on both sides of it, I find myself like not wanting to reach out sometimes to a friend who has suffered a loss because I don't know what to say, or I don't know, or I don't want to say the wrong thing, even though I actually think that doesn't matter as much as just like reaching out. So like you said, like I had all of these questions, had all of these emotions, and was very confusing, and just like everything was just so weird, and it was too much to kind of just hold inside.
Right.
So
yeah.
I started putting what I needed to hear, or what I thought I needed to hear, on sympathy cards. So the first one I made is called Permission to Grieve.
Yes, I love that one.
It's basically like you have full permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, and what you're feeling is okay. Like it's okay if that changes. and to do whatever it is you feel like you need to do for as long as you need to. I don't know. In some ways it seems like a simple thing, but it's hard to internalize. And especially because I feel like a lot of our lives aren't set up in space for grief. So for example, like my company was very understanding, but also I had 3 days of bereavement leave, and then I took some vacation days, which is crazy to me. And then I was back at work in a week. And, and people do this all the time because grief is one of the most universal experiences. And in general, I felt like the internal message, and then one that I internalized, was like, okay, I had my time to grieve, and now it's time to like move on. Yeah. Or, even the first year is hard, but then you're okay. And in my experience, that's definitely not how it works. Right. Other people, like, I don't think it works like that for anybody. So these cards are just kind of my way of, I guess, processing for myself, but also putting them out there in case anybody else is feeling the same way. And in some ways, like inserting some humor into the situation, because I think it's critical to survival.
Yes, I agree. Again, to just let you know that like I've stocked up on cards from you specifically about grief because I love it. I love it. I'm going to just say that. Yeah. It feels weird to say, but I just love that you said grief is one of the most universal things, because it is also one of the things that we avoid like the plague talking about or acknowledging in other people, because we think we're going to inflict more pain than the grief already has. And if you're in the throes of it, like you said, if you're in the throes of literally not being able to see past your nose in it, feeling you beside me is much more important than whatever word you said. Having that support there. A lot of times when people are in grief, they can't even hear the words that are being said at all. So, having that support is such a big thing. One of the things that has been really helpful, it was on Twitter, and I'm not a big Twitter person, but there was somebody that had posted this series of tweets, and they included an image, and they were talking about like thinking of grief as a box and having a big ball in this box, and there's a button on the side of the box. Bear with me.
I've seen this.
You've seen this? Okay, good. I'm like, bear with me a little bit because it's going to get a little convoluted. But with time, after a year, it's not healed. After that week of time, you're not great and fine and let's move to the next chapter. That's not how it works. But this idea that as time goes by, as you give yourself space to actually experience the emotion of it all, rather than shoving it away or, numbing it, that you can allow more space that ball doesn't hit the button quite as often in everything you do. It doesn't hit that grief button, that pain button in every move you make. But there are going to be times where that ball bounces at a certain angle and it hits that grief button in a way you didn't expect. And again, like my experience with loss and grief, it was something that was much more black and white, right? It was like, you knew, like, we live in this life where we are humans and our life is very fragile and you never know what's going to happen. And especially if someone's sick or if the doctors can tell you how it happened, that should be the thing that makes you feel closure. I don't know if that's the word even, but feel grounded in understanding that it happened. And the emotion part of it, like, you're just going to have to figure out how to deal with that. And there's a certain amount of time, it's unwritten, but you're supposed to just get over it. But instead, this idea that like, this is part of the life experience, that like that pain, that grief is what makes living so beautiful, is what makes celebrating that life so wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. And it is something that changes over time. And I relate to that button analogy where, like I think about it a lot, not as much as I used to, and it feels different to me. But it doesn't go away, and I've come out of it, I think, in some ways fundamentally different, because like, how can you go through something so significant and come out the same person on the other side?
Yeah.
Right. So in some ways, like, it will always inform who I am and choices that I make, even if it continues to evolve.
Yeah, it is this idea of like, it's a path in life. And once you've moved the path over, like, you can't go back and say, oh, I never knew that road went this way. Like, you've seen it.
Yeah. I mean, have you read Harry Potter?
I haven't. I always get like, oh, sorry. No, I haven't. But I want to hear about it because I feel like the lessons I've heard through Harry Potter, I'm like, I really should read those books or at least watch the movies.
Oh, well, it's so good, but I'm not judging you at all for not reading them. But they are really good. And I don't know if I want to spoil it for you.
That's okay. Spoil. It's all right.
I think about this a lot, where essentially there are these magical carriages in Harry Potter, and they look like they fly on their own. So they carry the students to the school and they just look like they're flying on their own. And that's what Harry Potter has always assumed. And then something happens and he witnesses or he experiences a loss. And then the next summer or the next fall, when he goes back to school, he sees, instead of the carriages being drawn by themselves, they're being drawn by these like winged horses. Oh. And he like turns to other people and he's like, do you like, basically like, what's up with these horses? Like, have you seen them? And everyone is like, what? Like, I don't see them. The carriages are the same as they've always been. And then he meets this girl, Luna, who I think lost her mom when she was young. And she was like, I see these horses too. And it turns out that you can only see the horses if you've like witnessed death. Wow. So I actually think that a lot when I talk to people and like other people who've experienced losses. I'm like, I feel like I'm one of those people who see the horses and they do too. And everyone else is like, I get it. Like, I believe you, but I don't like fully understand what they look like. Yeah. And they're like, no, I see them. Like, I see the winged horses.
They're there. They're definitely there. Yeah. I can't act like that. Yeah. Oh my God, that's amazing. You know, I'm like covered in goosebumps right now. That was absolutely beautiful. And it was such a beautiful way to express that. I feel like when you were talking about trying to put yourself in other people's shoes when you're creating the messages that you put out and really trying to understand as much as you're able where they're coming from, there is always this space of uncertainty and that you might not be able to draw the horse if you've never seen it, but giving the space for the fact that those horses do exist and that lived experience has allowed your ability to see that is just, it was so nice. My goodness. Try not to cry over here. I was like, that's amazing. So Harry Potter, I'm going to add it to my list. Maybe an audiobook, maybe a movie, I'm not sure. But one of the things that I kind of I'm going to piggyback on a little bit there is this idea of creating this beautiful art that you create and putting the messages you put out while still being able to customize them in a way that are relevant to people. So you've made a very specific choice to allow for your art to be something that is very inclusive, you know, just even the different characters that you offer, the different skin colors, the different clothing colors you offer, all of that. I'd just love to hear a little bit about how that came about and how that's played out as you're creating and maybe even a little bit of an inside scoop around how you make that happen. I think when we think about like the assembly line of creating like a car or something, how that kind of is a mass production, how this idea of really being able to customize and be so thoughtful in this beautiful stuff you're putting out, how that all plays itself out too.
Sure. Yeah. So for my cards, a lot of them have characters on them. And, you know, if you go online, you can choose which character you want on each card, like anywhere from like 2 to 6 options. So for example, one of my wedding cards is, yay, you found your person. And it has 2 characters on it and you can customize it for like gender and skin color and hair. So you can have 2 grooms or 2 brides or an interracial couple if you want. I don't know. I guess it's quite simple. Like I offer those options because that's what we look like. Like we don't all look the same, which seems obvious when you go out in the world. But then when you go to the card aisle, it's actually pretty hard to find cards that explicitly have people of color or LGBTQ people on them. And, you know, I hear people say, they had to take a crayon and like color in the faces of the people on the cards themselves, or had to choose one with animals instead of people on them because they couldn't find one with a person that looked like them. And we give cards to celebrate or acknowledge the important people and experiences in our lives. And if that's the case, like they should fit our lives, like our real lives, not, you know, whatever cookie cutter image of what Hallmark things our lives are or should be. And so that's really important to me. And that's like at the core of the cards I make too. I think representation really matters. And just like in the movies or TV shows or in books, it's important to see people who look like you, who are living lives that you can relate to. I think it makes people feel important, or at least not erased, and that they belong. So that was like a very conscious choice on my part to have those different options for people to customize the cards to fit their lives. So that's really important to me. It's on the back end, it's not. It's a bit of a logistical nightmare sometimes. So I make all the cards myself by hand. So I design them and then I print them on like an old printing press.
Yeah.
So I print them one at a time so you get that nice sort of embossed feel to them. And then I paint them in. So when I get an order, I'll look at what characters they choose and then I paint the characters in by hand. So as I've gotten bigger, it's not the most efficient process, but I don't know. To me, it's worth it. And I didn't start this business to like sell widgets. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm figuring out how to make it work time-wise. But for now, I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, as a fan and as a follower on social media, God, I feel like such a stalker when I say this stuff sometimes. But the amount of people that like, whether I've given them your card or talked about your cards, that I then go to Instagram and I'm like, you need to watch how she makes these. Like it is because there is so much care that you put in them. And there's so much art, not only just the art of creating that message that is so wonderful and offering so many different characters. And it's not just characters like male, female, like you have different characters with different hair textures that I find myself when I'm doing, especially when I was doing a lot of marketing work, like doing stock photography even, which you would think like stock photography, your hope is to be representative so that people can grab from. Most of it is very, very standard. Everybody's got straight hair. Everybody's light skinned and mostly white. So if you're trying to do that stuff, it's very difficult to find anything, even if you're looking from behind where you don't even see the person, there's cues and indicators that make it a very specific normal. And so I think the thought that you put in every aspect of creating that card is so beautiful. And then to know that when you're creating them, you're going by hand, stamping them, rolling them out on the press, and painting them. I mean, to watch that just makes the card mean so much more. And the card meant so much in the first place. So the other thing I do need to just acknowledge is like I grew up and we didn't really give cards in my family. Greeting card exchanges weren't something that were part of our celebration per se. I mean, I can definitely pull out some cards from when it was like second birthday or something. But I say this because what you're doing has made cards mean so much to me in my life in my 30s. So like it's cards, it is this gorgeous art that you're doing. It's cards, it's messaging, but it's also just this, I think it's a mode of communication and a level of care that you put to what you produce that's next level.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Oh man, now I'm getting all teary.
I told you I wasn't going to try to gush too hard, but it means a lot. My goodness. Okay, I'm going to pull myself together. One of the pieces of this, you mentioned about being seen and being represented, and a lot of what we hear in the public discourse right now is racial or I should say visual, right? So because race and ethnicity, a lot of people blend all those things, and even your gender identity, people like to say, okay, I saw you for 2 seconds, I know everything about you. I also want to talk a bit about how your messaging allows for people to be allies. I know that being an ally and living in that space of knowing that you have privilege because of one aspect of your identity, that's much more normalized in society. But having the language on how to say, oh God, that sucks that just happened. And I really do mean it sucks. I'm not trying to make it frivolous. Or, not necessarily knowing how to support someone with the right language because the tools and the language you've been given aren't sufficient. I know you have a specific line of cards that's LGBTQ plus allyship, but I also know one of my favorite cards when I walked past you the first time in a market was, I'm sorry that they touched your hair. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about giving people the language, not just about seeing themselves on that card, but being an ally and being supportive in a way that we don't necessarily always have the words or the imagery to do so.
Yeah. So I do have a line of cards for allies. And there are ones in there like, yay, you have a new pronoun if you have a friend who's transitioning genders, or yay, you're non-binary. And like I said before, like I generally make cards based on my own experiences. So for example, like the grief cards are something that I know very intimately. It's an experience I have very intimately. The cards for allies are sort of the first cards that I made that aren't drawn from my personal experience per se as like a straight cisgender woman, but I felt that they were important to make because I have that privilege, and sort of giving people either like sparking the idea that, oh, maybe I should give a card for this. And just like, again, like expanding people's ideas of like, what are the important occasions that we should be celebrating, or like you said, like just giving them a simple phrase or a medium, a greeting card to say something that maybe they otherwise wouldn't know how to say or feel comfortable saying.
Yeah.
I don't have answers. I'm still trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to be an ally? What does it mean for me to be an ally, which will look different for me than for somebody else? And, and I'm sure that I will make missteps along the way, but I felt it was important for me, if I'm like really trying to make cards that include and celebrate a wide range of identities and experiences, to make cards for anyone in the LGBTQ plus community. And they won't be for everyone, but hopefully can expand that representation a bit more.
Yeah. One of the things, so I do a lot of work in diversity and inclusion, and that conversation around allyship it's one that's so interesting because like everyone's like, yes, I want to be an ally. Like I've never heard anybody say like, nah, I'm good. But it's this idea of, okay, but what next, right? Like, thanks. Yes, you signed on, but what does allyship look like? And one of the things that, again, I wish there was more space for, because we are in a place where certainty seems to be the default, that we need to be the most certain about what we're doing next. And if we left some room for the I don't know, and we left some room to say, here, you know what? I've got the mic right now, but what you're asking me isn't my answer to give. Let me be the person that I can be, the platform that I have. Thank you for giving me this mic, but let me give it to someone else who can actually answer that question on the best way to be an ally to them.
Right.
And that doesn't mean for them to do the work for you either. Like I'm always very cognizant of, well, I don't really know what white privilege is. Give the microphone to somebody that's a person of color and have them tell me how to act as a white person. Not necessarily. But what it means is, if you don't understand the impact of things, or you don't understand where those paper cuts are coming from, allow the space for that paper cut to be expressed, or the desire for what could be in the space of that paper cut to be expressed, and then operate from there, and operate from a place of being a student rather than being the expert that may not know. So this whole allyship, literally this allyship idea of opening, I mean, you create a card, right? But the inside of that card is open and empty in a way that's beautiful. It's a blank slate for people to write in. Like there is something so gorgeous about the message up front, the encouragement, and then the space to really navigate it too.
Yeah, definitely. I felt a little bit conflicted or unsure about making these cards, again, because I'm not drawing from my own experience, and I didn't want to have like unintentional harm come from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like I'm the best person to be necessarily like explaining or talking about these issues, because I'm not the most well-versed, even though I've tried to educate myself. But again, exactly to your point, it shouldn't be like people's jobs necessarily to explain to you like their experiences and open up their experiences for your education. Separately from the cards themselves, I think being celebratory, it's a way to open up a discourse, because people will come to my craft shows and ask what a card means, and then we'll end up having that conversation. So that's another part of it that I felt was important.
Yeah. So can I come and just pull up a chair and just sit there to listen to these? Like I have like, because it is when people are coming, especially in a place like a craft show, you're going to see the beautiful creations that other people are putting out in the world. So you're already in a place where you're open.
Right.
The fact that you're open and you're willing to give, right? If you're going to purchase something, you're willing to exchange value for that art that's coming your way. So you're coming in a very specific state of mind. And then to have the generosity of discourse around something that you might not necessarily be able to have the conversation or the language around that's incredible. Wow. See, this is why when you were saying, I'm exposed to different people in different spaces, like the first thing that came to my mind is, wow, it's like you're welcoming conversation about things that many people don't come across in any aspect of their life, just by sitting there at a market and being like, here's the art that I'm putting out there. Like, I think that's incredible.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. And, again, I think I'm hoping to spark reflections in other people, but it also pushes me to explain why I believe what I believe, which is something that I don't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily have to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's so cool. So dipping into my fandom moment again, I remember when you posted your Resistance is Female artwork that was on a bus shelter in New York. I would love to hear a little, I literally squealed in excitement. I was like, that is so cool.
I'd love to hear a little bit about like what the Resistance to Female Artwork is, and we'll make sure to include all the links to these things in the show notes. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the artwork itself, and then how it got to bus shelter status, how that all played out. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so it was a bit surreal. So I had the chance to participate in a campaign called Resistance is Female, which is a series of essentially organized ad takeovers. So they replace ads with art in public spaces like bus shelters and phone booths. And they feature art from primarily female identifying, but a range of artists around the same theme. So I created a custom poster that had those words surrounded by my illustrations of a diverse group of women. And I guess the general idea behind it is when we walk around on the street, like we're bombarded with ads that we didn't opt into, trying to sell us things. And so it's reclaiming some of that public space, either to spread messages that people find encouraging, or at the very least to spark a dialogue. And so for me, Resistance is Female is a general message of encouragement or a reminder that we can change the status quo, and like a little push to act or speak up in whatever way makes sense for you, because I think it's different for everybody. And I think that's one of the things that's really powerful about art. And when we think about the intersection of like art and activism or art and politics, is that I think it's a relatively easy entryway to open up a dialogue, right? Like you don't necessarily have to read an article and debate it. You can glance up at a phone booth and like in an instant take in enough to have something to think about or talk about.
Yes. Oh, that's great. I don't know if we've ever talked fully about. So one of the things in my venture outside of the standard 9-to-5 world, corporate, I call her Corporate Nikki. So once I left, I didn't leave her fully behind, but I moved her from the driver's seat in the car. And one of the biggest discoveries has been the idea that what female is, right? What feminine leadership is all about. And it's a big part of what I do now. Feminine leadership is different than kind of this traditional paradigm of leadership we've seen, but it doesn't mean that it is this kind of Stepford wife, submissive vibe either. And whatever submissive might mean to you, right? But this idea, you would say that submissive and resistant are probably different things. And that as women, resistance and saying, no, this is not okay, or no, I'm going to do it a different way. Or, yeah, okay, maybe, but let's try to change it a little bit. So it's not always just full on no. This idea that we as women and female identifying can stand up and say, hey, let's do this differently. Hey, that doesn't work. It is something that, again, listen to how many words I just had to say that out loud. Whereas you have 3 words and all of your beautiful artwork on a bus shelter where people are walking through. I mean, how many people have eyes on that, right?
Yeah.
And they're able to have the same kind of conversation. And resistance means different things for different people, and female will mean different things to different people. So it really has an infinite number of ways that message can be received and communicated.
Yeah, definitely. And like as a side note, when I was working in private equity, I would call myself work Janine. So I would talk to my friends and say like, this is how work Janine felt, or this is what work Janine did.
So work Janine and Corporate Nikki, we should have hung out. I like this version of us hanging out much better.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that's so cool. Isn't that crazy though? Like you kind of, in order to survive, as you sometimes need to label the aspects of yourself so you can understand, oh, that was work Janine talking. That wasn't me necessarily. That wasn't the core of who I am. And the reason she's saying those things isn't necessarily for a bad reason either. But there is this play on like, I've learned how to be this person to operate and to survive and to succeed in certain situations, but I don't always need to have that version of myself at the forefront.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not inherently bad, but I think when those two things two identities get too different, which is how I ended up feeling, like work Janine ended up feeling like different than Janine.
Yeah.
That I think that's when I was like, I think it's time to go, because I feel like I'm 2 people and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. So I did a TED Talk back in April about this idea. It was mapped along the lines of the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly, which is weird because like I've never been someone that's all about caterpillars or butterflies or any of that kind of stuff. But this idea, when I was talking about it, was corporate Nikki started, the more corporate Nikki took the forefront, the more like the real core Nikki started getting wrapped in this cocoon of not being able to see. And the choice was either to kind of stay in that cocoon where my head was covered and I was being a bit suffocated, or to allow that to, to be like, oh crap, okay, I can't see. What am I going to do in this space? In this space, I've learned so much. I can do so much. I can actually transform myself. And hey, if I got to know myself a little bit better, watch what would happen. Like if I got to know myself and gave myself the space to really understand who I am and what I want to do and leverage all the skills and understanding and the amazing things. I think you talked a lot about being fortunate for this experience of work, Janine. Like corporate Nikki, she has taught me so much and I love her. If not for her, I wouldn't be able to be where I am right now, but also to know what parts of her to dial up and dial back so that I can emerge as the butterfly. I know it sounds so silly to say out loud, but like, that's it. It is this thing where like, if they are so different, if they're like polar opposites and they're not trying to interact with each other or understand each other, or even lay down some of the aspects of who they are that have made them so polarized and different, it feels like a disconnect and a break of the two identities of who you are, rather than finding that cohesion and finding the true parts of like real strength and beauty of who you are.
Yeah, I actually really love that, because I think that transformation from a caterpillar to a butterfly is one that everyone knows, but we don't really think about like, what if there's two caterpillars in the same cocoon and only one of them gets to be a butterfly?
What if a caterpillar is having an identity crisis? How does it handle it? Yes. Oh, that's so funny. Oh man. Yeah, it's crazy because I was trying to figure, as I mentioned before, metaphors are my jam. I couldn't figure out something that was universal about transformation and the struggle of it, because even when we heard about, so the Very Hungry Caterpillar is kind of the reference point that I use, that children's book. When we see that, it's like all this beautiful artwork, and it is beautiful artwork, and it's all this sunshine and like rainbows and a little bit of gluttony, right? Like you're shoving that the caterpillar eats everything, gets a stomach ache, but like it doesn't necessarily shine a light on what that transformation is like and how difficult and how uncomfortable that can be. And really, again, like in that same space of like not really being sure and having this space of like, who am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? Am I allowed to not know at this stage, right? Like I'm supposed to kind of like, even in grief, right? In grief, this happened. I'm supposed to have had the skills to be an adult and a human to handle all the things. I don't know. I do feel myself transforming. I don't know what it's going to look like. Am I going to scratch and claw to stay where I am? Am I going to surrender and let the wave take me? Like, what am I going to do? But the idea that that transformation is the magic. And it's the fear and it's the beauty and it's all those things that can hopefully allow that butterfly to form at some point. And again, it doesn't mean that the butterfly is the end game. I know that that doesn't really make sense because butterflies that do end up passing, but then they make a caterpillar, right? The whole idea would be that it's a cyclical thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think as I've gotten older, it's not that I know now what I want to do. It's more that I'm okay. I'm more okay with the fact that what I want will change. 10 years ago, I was working in private equity, and now I make art about my feelings. So who knows what
and
I'll
who knows
be doing.
Yes. What's 10 years from now look like? I don't know, but I do know that I'll start making the path and the steps in the right direction. That's something I do know about myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to know, like right now, what is your favorite piece that you are offering or that you've put out into the world?
Oh, that's tough.
Go with as many as you want.
I'll go with 2. So one we've talked about, I think the sympathy cards are, in some ways, I think the most important things that I've made and the ones that are most personal to me. So the permission to grieve card, the am I grieving correctly flowchart. And honestly, those are ones that I still turn to. I don't know if it's weird to turn to yourself for advice, but they're ones that I still read and find helpful for myself. And then the other one is I have a What We Carry tote bag.
Yes.
So basically, I asked a bunch of women online and in person, like, what are you carrying around with you right now? Like, what is literally in your bag, or what's on your mind? Figuratively, what are you carrying around with you? And then from those answers, I illustrated a collection of, items and feelings and ideas, like mental to-do lists, actual to-do lists, like snacks, socks, grief, like the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a reminder, I guess, of two things. Like, one is that like everybody's carrying around a lot of crap and we don't know what they are. So we should be compassionate because, we don't know what they're dealing with behind the scenes. And it's also a reminder for me that I'm carrying around a lot of stuff. And for me to try to, as much as I can, like shift what I'm carrying. So like put down some of the things that I actually don't want to be carrying around, and so that I can make room for the things that I want to make space for to the extent possible. And also, I think the project really stuck with me because women are amazing, and like the sheer amount of things that we juggle and responsible for day to day, really, I mean, I knew that and I experienced it, but I really felt it in like people's answers, just like how much we feel that we need to live up to and we need to do. But and also like how much we take care of others. Women carry around extra Band-Aids in case somebody else gets hurt.
Whether they're literal Band-Aids or figurative Band-Aids that they've built up, right? Like you know how to handle kind of any situation.
Yeah, so that's also something that I think about that every time I see the bag.
Oh, I just did so many silent poetry snaps. I was like trying not to like on it, but like, holy crap, again, chills. But this idea of we carry around so much, one, two, let's shift what we're carrying. So like you don't have to carry everything in your right hand because it's your strong hand, because that muscle will wear out. And then the third part, which is like literally my favorite thing, corporate Nikki's like, but is to actually release the things you're carrying around, right? Like, yes, you accumulate so much over time and so much over experience. And you see, right? You start seeing those horses that are pulling the carriages, right? And with that comes another understanding that you're walking around with. And understanding, like, as you do that, that's still, you're carrying that weight, whether it's good or bad weight, you're carrying all that with you. And the idea that you can actually let go of some stuff that like, it served me so wonderfully for a period of time. Thank you so much. I will give you a moment and say thank you. But you know what? You're not serving me anymore, and I gotta let you go. I will say, like, yes, we've talked a lot about women, but I think I was going to go American even. I don't even know that it's solely an American culture thing. We all carry around so much stuff, and I know very, very eloquent scientific words, stuff, but we carry around so much that we are unaware that we're carrying, that are keeping us so weighed down and stuck, or even more so pulling us backwards. If we gave ourselves the space to recognize, identify, and name what it is, we could actually identify like, oh crap, whoops, didn't realize I had that. Let me leave that back there. And you know what? Maybe even let me leave that there and have an understanding if I see somebody else that's carrying the same weight and they don't need it anymore, to be like, hey, this happened for me. Not sure if it's yours, but like, just want to share that if you're feeling comfortable enough to have resolved that. Like, there is so much that we don't necessarily release. We hold it up and we release it in the comments section on a social media post. And you're like, why did I just get so angry at that? Like, it's like, well, it's actually something completely different. But that idea of release is just, I mean, the world would be a very different place if that was encouraged more often.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a good point that like sometimes we don't even realize that we're carrying it around, right? We just like continually put things in our bag and then it just like sits at the bottom. We don't realize that it's there until we dump it out. And you're like, I can't believe I've been carrying this around for the last 2 years or whatever.
And I'll tell you, like, so socks are a perfect example. I love that that's on my bag because like my cousin and I, we would go bowling. She moved close to me and like the midway point was a bowling alley. And I was just like, it was like in the summer. I'm like, I'm not wearing socks. I'm wearing flip-flops, but I'm not about to go buy socks. So I had socks in my bag and I just found them like, and you swap them out, right? So they're a clean pair of socks and they're not small. They're in the bottom of my bag the other day. I'm like, what am I doing with these socks? Like, get them out of my bag. And they're not heavy either, right? But they're taking up real estate. They're taking up space. And when I'm blindly reaching in there, they're in the way to grab the thing I need.
Yes. That is a perfect metaphor. Yes.
Oh, see, I like a metaphor. I told you. Okay. So I talked about release as kind of a thing to change about the world right now, but I'd love to hear if there's anything that's either like a burning inspiration for a card or a conversation you've had with a friend or kind of anything that's come about that you feel like would be one thing that you wish we could change about the world right now.
That's like even harder than trying to find my favorite thing.
I'm like, tell me your journey in 2 seconds. Tell me pick your favorite child is pretty much what I asked about the card. And then now tell me how you're going to change the world. Okay, cool.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the first thing that kind of comes to mind are eliminating unconscious bias. I don't know how we're going to do that. Yeah. Or changing everything at the systemic level to address all of the racism and inequality inherently baked into how they work. I think climate change is our greatest existential threat and feels in some ways the least in our control. So maybe I would go with that one.
Yeah. Press that easy button. Thank you. We're all fixed. Cool. Great. But, change not only the climate change, but change our attitude about it too, right? Like, I don't want you to just fix it because then it'll just happen again. But like, if you can press a button and like everyone understands their impact on the world and fix it, cool.
I told you I didn't have any answers.
No, I love it. See, this easy button stuff is great because it's like visioning the world we want to see. I'm all about it. Keep going.
What else? I mean, okay, I don't know how this fits into everything, but something I think about a lot, I mean, it's not a new idea, is this idea of proximity and the idea that I think a lot of the policies that are made and like actions people take and like whatever systems we put in place that are unjust are partly that way because the people in charge of making the decisions are not in close proximity to those that are impacted by their decision making. Yes. And because they're not in close proximity to them, because they don't know them, it becomes easy to other them, to fear them, to see them as like less worthy or just like a caricature. And I think when we spend time with people who are different from us, it's actually hard not to see the shared humanity. And I think it becomes much harder to trample on other people's rights when you know some of the people that you're trampling. It's not realistic, but I would want everyone to care about or love somebody who falls into every other marginalized group. Especially people in power would have a relative or a friend who is Black or brown or queer, undocumented, or like some intersection of these groups that are more vulnerable to having their rights stripped away. Because I think if the decisions made by the people in power impacted their own family, like their own loved ones, or like even themselves, they would be making very different decisions today.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I don't know that anybody has used that word proximity. I think it's so gorgeous. I mean, I'm sorry, let me clarify. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have used the word proximity. I have not had this conversation with the word proximity in there, and I love it so much. There is this quote from Brene Brown from Braving the Wilderness, one of her recent books.
I love Brene Brown. I cried during her Netflix special.
Yes, I know, right? I feel like, so many things. I could gush about Brene for a while. Her Netflix special, yes, go watch it if you haven't. I also like Rising Strong and Daring Greatly have been like very formative because what I've learned, and I'd love to hear kind of your thought on this, like the more you go and you go out to do your own thing, it actually, every aspect of your business tends to be part of therapy as well. So it's like your own exploration in yourself. So again, you get the proximity piece, you're so close to yourself in that because you don't have, when you're working somewhere else, you're thinking and considering all the other aspects of that business. But when you're working for yourself, you're getting real close to all the strengths and weaknesses and vulnerabilities of who you are and what you have. So yeah, I feel like one of the things, I'm sorry, I'm tangenting, but I'm so excited. So Brene Brown says, move in. People are really hard to hate close up. This idea that you need to not only understand or see, but really get close to and feel and understand the lived experience of others is so important. And I think I love that you mentioned like have it be part of your family, but even better, have it be your experience because it's so easy to say. It's kind of like, I have one Black friend, right? Like, cool, that's great. But like that, even being able to distance yourself in that language allows you to see yourself as different from and not feel the impact of. And so I love that you use the word proximity.
Yeah, basically, let's dismantle all the systems.
Right? Yeah.
Topple the power structure.
Yeah. Well, and really, like in the same way, right? It's this idea of understanding how we got where we are. So, like, let's change the systems and the power structures and all of that, right? Let's change this issue that we have, the climate change. But if there's really truly a magic button that would make it so we're not still living in this same shit show that we're living in certain places, it's really understanding, God, apparently I'm a Harry Potter fan now, especially with that story, but like it's doing that, right? It's the ability to press that button, but also to see the horses too, like to allow yourself to be, I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones person, but
I am.
Okay, so Bran in Game of Thrones, right? His ability to lead by knowing all that has happened and all that will happen allows for kind of this holistic view of leadership. And that's very different from the structure that we're living in now. I think, especially where we are right now, we operate from a lot of fear and a lot of scarcity thought. What would happen if we actually had the ability to really understand who's around us, what's around us, what came before? I think history is a huge, and I've never been someone that's like all about history in the same way I'm not all about science and that, but like history has a way of repeating itself, not just a saying, it's a real deal. But having that education is such an interesting part of understanding this unconscious bias work, this systemic change in our systems that have created such an imbalance in something like our prison industrial complex, right? Like there's so much that goes into this stuff that's not just let's fix it. Yeah, let's go. It's let's understand why it got here so we can make a change so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the problems are so intractable and so deeply rooted that you have to go back and sort of not just address, I don't know, the effects that they're having, but like why they are the way that they are. I forget, there's something like the systems aren't broken. They're working exactly the way that they're designed to. I forget where that's from. But I think about that a lot too, right? And I think that's an important piece to acknowledge if we're trying to change things.
Yes. I feel like we're throwing quotes back and forth. There's one, and I think I'm going to piggyback on it. It's Audre Lorde talks about that you can't beat the master with the master's tool, or you can't change the system with the master's tools, because the master's tools are made to keep the system exactly how they are. But this idea that like, yeah, we want to change things, but if we're going to change things using the same systems and processes that got us here, we're going to just end up back here, and it may be maybe with a different outfit on, but it'll be the same outcome.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. My goodness. We're like, yeah, change the world. Now, here's the question I have that goes back to you. I want to hear like what this next year for you looks like and what you're looking forward to. Future visioning, what personally, professionally, wherever you want to go, like what are you most excited about the year to come?
Well, professionally, this will be my first full year trying to keep myself afloat just from Kwohtations. I'm focused on kind of getting my house in order, operating like a real business, hopefully growing the business into new stores, customers, and I'm also pushing myself to hold space to create because, I mean, there's so much that goes into running a business. It's definitely more than one person could work on full time. Yeah. But I do want to, now that I have the time, make new things, which is kind of why I started doing this in the first place. So that's both probably what I'm most excited about, and also in some ways the most daunting because, like how do you force yourself to be generative creatively, right? Yeah. Like I can sit down and like write a grant report, even if I don't want to. Right. How do you sit down and come up with force yourself to come up with a new idea? And I'm not sure. So that's something I'm looking forward to exploring. Personally, I'm looking forward to summer. I think summers in New York are really special, and just like spending time with people I love. I work a lot and I don't work regular hours. So I've been trying to remember that also part of why I made the leap is because I can take time off in the middle of the day, or I can take a whole day off or a week off if I want to. So I'm trying to take advantage of that more. In the last couple of years, I felt a bit like unstable, like a lot of things are up in the air and like feeling kind of volatile. So I'm actually just looking forward to not having any big shakeups. Yeah. Fingers crossed, which I don't know, like maybe it doesn't sound super exciting, but I'm a real homebody. So like the thought of just like having time to do nothing with a friend and like eating something delicious is probably what brings me the most joy in all the world. So I feel like I'm in a very similar space, or I have been in a very similar space of trying to find where you can generate content from and feel really good and strong about that content. I can make content for other people and feel good and strong that I checked all the boxes off of what they're doing, or what their kind of proposal asked for. But this idea of really creating from that source of creativity within you for the things you're trying to do, it can be very daunting. Like you can't set aside a half hour on a calendar and be like, all right, time to create, turn on the creative juices, let's go. It just doesn't work like that. And there have been a couple books that I've read. Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert I thought was really helpful.
But really, I think one of the things that you mentioned on your personal has been, at least for me, one of the most generative experiences is space, calm, being around the people that you love, slowing life down a bit. And it leaves pockets for the things that you love to enter your life and to actually use you and your creativity as a vessel for expression. So I am, as the fan that's creepily stalking you on Instagram, I am super excited to see how this next year comes into fruition. Don't worry, I'll be shouting from the rooftops, liking from the Instagram feed, and all the like from there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Well, thank you for your time. You have been so generous with it and with your life story. And we didn't cover your whole life, but we covered parts of it. I am just so grateful. So grateful. And creative entrepreneurial Janine and creative entrepreneurial Nikki, we got to hang out more.
Yeah, let's.
Next time I'm in New York, we'll make that happen.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you, Janine.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was so much fun.
Oh, yeah. It's fun for me too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
How amazing was Janine? That was such a great conversation, especially right now in the world that we're in, where this past week we had all that conversation about go back where you're from. I think that moment when Janine mentioned that she doesn't feel as though she fits in China or America, and in America people are telling her to go back to China. Ooh, listening to that back just felt so relevant for this week. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I have so much respect and gratitude for Janine for taking the time today. I am hoping that in the future, Janine and I will be able to partner to offer up some really cool quotation swag. But in the meantime, make sure you head on over to her site, which will be in the show notes, and check out some of the incredible work that she has put forth. And I encourage you, coming out of this podcast episode, think about the ways that you project your Instagram self over your Google search history self, and try to dig a little deeper to understand why you're doing that, if it's helpful, if it's not, and how we might be able to become a little bit more real and curious with each other in real life. Okay, enough from me. I can't wait to bring you another amazing episode in a couple weeks. And in the meantime, please do connect over on social media. As you know, if you've heard before, I am on all the things at Nikki Innocent. So at Nikki Innocent on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and you can look me up on LinkedIn if that's your jam. Also, head on over to nikkiinnocent.com for all the information about the stuff that I've got going on. Oh, we've got exciting stuff coming up. So I am so grateful for you to make it through this whole episode, and catch you next time. Have a great day.